Thinking about buying a mixer to make your podcasting easier? Well, before you do, let me share a little bit of what I've learned on my journey into podcasting. I'm Vaughn Amon, the host of the IoT Wavelength podcast, and I've been involved with electronics, musical instruments, and recording equipment for years. But when I set out to begin podcasting, I learned that it's a little different animal. It has its own set of challenges, and finding the right equipment can be critical. Just to be clear, I'm not receiving endorsements for doing this video. I'm just trying to help people get off to a solid start in their podcasting journey. Podcasting has exploded in popularity in recent years. At the end of 2019, an estimated 62 million people in the U.S. listened to podcasts weekly, and there were an estimated 700,000 podcasts on the Apple Podcast platform alone. So that's why it was surprising to me that there wasn't specialized professional level equipment available to make podcasters' lives easier, because the technical elements of podcasting can be challenging for beginners and seasoned podcasters alike. And the last thing you want is to have the technology get in your way and keep you from creating the best podcast experience for your listeners. But in 2019, a couple of new professional podcast mixers were introduced to the market: the Zoom LiveTrak L-8 and the Rodecaster Pro. And we're going to take a closer look at both of those mixers in a minute. But first, let's take a step back and look at what a good podcast mixer should be. A good podcast mixer should reduce the complexity of recording the podcast. The controls should be clearly marked, easy to understand, and easy to use. It should reduce the number of accessories required and the tangle of cables around the mixer while recording. A good podcast mixer should reduce post-processing, or ideally eliminate it altogether. Now, post-processing means editing the podcast after it's been recorded to improve the sound quality or to add music or spots, etc. But post-processing can be complex, it can take a lot of time, and it can be expensive if you contract it out. That also means that the mixer would ideally record the podcasts internally. Or, since you don't need to do podcast post-processing, you can use the mixer's output to broadcast or stream live. It should also interface with phones, PCs, and pads, so you can do post-processing and send your recordings to podcast sites. It should have inputs and outputs available with plugs, USB cables, or Bluetooth connections. A good podcast mixer should also let you do remote podcasts. A battery-operated option is ideal because you don't always have power plugs available at remote sites. Now, with that much competition, you not only need to have great content in your podcast, you also want to sound as professional as possible. So first and foremost, you need to have clean, high-gain microphone inputs with no hiss or hum or static or echo or background noise that irritates listeners, and poorly designed equipment can produce terrible sound. You don't want it to sound like this, or like this, or even like this. You just want clear quality sound that your listeners can understand and enjoy. So what makes a great podcast mixer? Again, you need high quality microphone inputs for the host plus in-studio guest microphones. And 2 to 4 microphone inputs is the sweet spot. You need multiple headphone outputs with separate volume controls for each in-studio guest. You need mix-minus for connecting remote guests via telephone, Skype, Slack, or similar services. Mix-minus is a mix of the entire podcast minus the voice of the caller, and that eliminates echo and other problems you can encounter when adding remote guests. Mix-minus can be done on a regular mixer, but it takes extra effort and cabling, so it's much better to have it built into the podcast mixer. You need onboard recording capability, so you don't need to connect an external recorder or PC. That's a stereo recording of the podcast mix plus separate channels for each individual input in case you need to go back and fix things later in post-processing. And finally, you need a USB output and input capability for connecting PCs and pads. You need 1 or more stereo USB inputs and a USB output of the stereo podcast mix plus each separate input channel. Now let's take a closer look at the Zoom LiveTrak L-8 and the Rodecaster Pro. Both were introduced in 2019. Both are designed and manufactured by reputable, reliable companies, and both are solid performers that can give professional level results. So let's look at the details of each. This is the Zoom LiveTrak L-8 podcast mixer that borrows from its big brother, the Zoom L-12 mixer. It's a little bit smaller with fewer inputs, but it has
a couple of podcast-specific features added to it, like built-in mix minus and 6 sound pads. We'll get into that in just a minute. But it uses the same tried and true high-quality recording capabilities of other Zoom recorders at its core. So even though it came out in late 2019, it should be a very solid performer. It has 6 combo XLR phone plug mic inputs here. This is 2 more inputs than the Rodecaster, which is nice to have. And 2 of these inputs can be set up for high impedance by pushing these buttons here, which means that you can plug guitars or other musical instruments directly into these 2 inputs, or you can use them as regular microphone inputs. So you can have 6 microphone inputs or 2 musical instrument inputs and 4 microphone inputs at the same time. There are 2 balanced outputs to connect this mixer to another mixer or to an external recorder, and there are 4 headphone outputs, with each one having its own individual volume control. So 1 for the host and 3 for local guests. And there's one nice feature on here that the other guests can have their own separate mixes, so they don't have to be all hearing the same mix that's going out on the podcast recording. And that's a kind of a high-end mixer function that's available. It's a nice to have. The microphone preamps have plenty of gain, so there's no need for a cloud lifter or FET heads or any external preamps to be used in front of this mixer. And they're low noise amplifiers, so you can use dynamic microphones easily with this mixer. Phantom power is available, 48 volts. However, it's all or none. You push this button and phantom power is applied to all 6 microphone inputs. Now that may be a problem in some applications if you're mixing microphones, because some microphones require phantom power. Other microphones cannot handle phantom power. It could potentially break them. So you have to be careful that you check out your particular application to make sure that you can use phantom power across the board. There are 3 band adjustable microphone EQs per channel. So the way you do that is select your channel. You select your EQ level, high, medium, and low band. And then you go to the next channel, select it, and set its high, medium, and low band settings. Go back. You can see that each channel remembers its EQ settings. You can also put the low cut filter in or out per channel. There are effects available in this unit. So there are reverb effects, echo and delay, phaser and chorus, and 2 vocal presets that are a combination of reverb and echo to sweeten singing voices. And the special effects send is adjustable here. Again, per channel basis, you select your channel and then you select the amount of effect that's going to be applied to that channel. Now to change the individual settings on the effects, you use this small monochrome display here and can select what you want to set and change the setting with this knob. And while it works very well, there are lots of settings, and sometimes you have to dig through the menus to get to the individual settings, so it can be a little cumbersome. This mixer has 2 stereo inputs on these channels, and the stereo inputs can be selectable for either external line input through this TRS 1/4 inch jack here, or you can select USB input for stereo on this channel, or you can select USB input for stereo on this channel, or you can select the sound pads for each one of these stereo channels, so you can have up to 6 sound pads available. Now what that means is if you're using one of these inputs for line input, the sound pads aren't available on that side, so it can be a little limiting on the amount of sound pads that you do have available. Now this channel also has a TRRS jack, and there's a plug that comes with the unit, TRRS plug, to plug in a phone, and this provides your mix minus capability for remote phone applications. If you're using this with Apple products that have lightning output, you'll need this kind of an adapter to go from your telephone to the TRRS jack, and it plugs in. And this plugs into your telephone. It's very easy to use. Now when you're getting one of these, if you need an adapter, make sure that you get an adapter that has send and receive capability, because not all of the adapters can do send and receive at the same time. There's a USB output from this unit, so it provides 10 channel inputs to an external PC or a pad, which is a stereo mix, and then 10 individual tracks, one for each input, so that you can go in and post, and you'll have each track available separately for post-processing. You can record locally into an SD card using the recorder function here, and you can put up to 512 gigabyte SD card into it, and records the stereo mix for all the inputs, the same as it does to the USB output. So it's a stereo mix plus individual channel capability of recording for each individual channel. You can go back and post later. The recordings are time and date stamped, and you can rename the files by going into the menu. And one of the more powerful capabilities of this mixer is the scene capability. So you see we can have up to 7 individual scenes selected, and this is a saving of all of the settings on the mixer, including the fader positions. This can be very powerful if you have multiple shows that you're using this mixer for, or if you're using it as a house mixer, if you have different settings for different bands or different setups. It's really nice to have the scenes. The fader settings are saved again, but they're a little bit confusing to use, so I would strongly recommend that you watch one of the several excellent YouTube videos that are available on operating the Zoom L-12, and it shows you how these scenes are operated. Is it really that complicated? Yeah, kinda. So there are some important nuances that you need to understand with the scenes, and while it's very powerful, some of the nuances are not really straightforward, so you really need to look at those YouTube videos and figure out how to use the scenes effectively. Now you'll notice at this point there are no cables attached to the unit, and it's still running. How's that happening? Well, there are 4 AA batteries in the back of the unit, so it can run off of 4 AA batteries for a couple of hours approximately. Or it can run off of the USB input. That's right here. So you can connect this to a USB power supply, 5 volts, or to a PC that supplies enough power to run the unit. That's very handy for recording out in the field. All in all, it's a very nice, compact unit to have. But there are some drawbacks. So overall, it's a rather intimidating professional level interface. So it's not a particularly good choice for people who are technophobes. It can be complex to operate, and there are several subtle but important quirks that you need to be aware of when using it. It has knobs and buttons for functions that the Rodecaster has in its menu system. So it's a little more complicated to operate. Again, you should watch the YouTube training videos to understand the operation in detail. And another drawback is the 48 volt phantom power is all channels or none. That could be a drawback depending on your application. But the most important thing to me is there's no compressor, noise gate, de-esser, exciter built into the channels like the Rodecaster Pro has. So that means that you have to do all of those in post-processing if you want to sweeten your sound. And you have to set up each voice channel separately and then remix. This is the Rodecaster Pro podcasting workstation. Now, Rode built this unit from the ground up and designed it to make podcasting easier. It has excellent ergonomics with a large color display that you can use for navigation, and it makes it easy to add new features with future firmware updates. It has a large record pause button that's hard to miss. It has large volume sliders for each channel, large colorful effects pads, and mute and solo preview buttons per each channel. Overall, it's a relatively unintimidating, colorful, and just generally fun interface to use. Now the microphone amplifiers have plenty of gain, and there's no need for cloud lifters or anything else, other external preamps to plug into this unit. They're low noise amplifiers, so dynamic microphones can be easily used with this mixer. Phantom power is selectable per channel, so you can turn on phantom power here in the menus or turn it off for each channel. There's locking XLR plugs on the back of the unit, and in fact all of the large plugs are located on the back of the unit, and that makes the workspace a lot less cluttered. Whereas on the Zoom L-8, all the plugs point up and all the cables hang in this direction.
In contrast, on the Rodecaster Pro,
all of the plugs plug out the back and all of the cables hang off the back of the unit. It just makes the workspace a lot less cluttered. And the mic presets, which are selectable here, are available for various Rode microphones. Rode is traditionally a microphone manufacturer, so they have most of their microphones listed in here on presets for the Pod Mic and Procaster, etc. There's also an Electro Voice RE20, which is a popular podcast microphone preset here, and a generic condenser and a generic dynamic microphone preset. Now the presets are nice and they work pretty well in general, but one drawback is you can't do individual EQ settings, so you can't fine-tune any of the presets. Now there's also switchable ducking on channel 1. If we look at that, ducking is selectable here, but not on any of the other channels. Ducking means that when the host is speaking on channel 1, all the other channels are lowered a little bit in volume so that he can be, or she can be heard over the rest of the speakers or music that may be playing in the background. Now there's also per channel microphone signal processing. In compressors, high pass filters, de-esser, noise gate, and oral exciter, including big bottom, for each channel selectable. You can turn the processing off or turn it back on again. Now this is very nice because this built-in signal processing replaces several $100s worth of external gear. If you were to do all of these features in external gear, it would be over $100 per channel to replicate that, and that's all built in on the Rodecaster Pro, which is very nice. There's 4 headphone outputs with individual volume controls, and there's a stereo monitor output with a volume control, so you can attach external monitors and control the volume from here. But if you want to connect this Rodecaster Pro to a line level output and send to other mixers or recorders, you can also disable this volume control and set the output to line level again on the color touchscreen. Very easy menu selection to change that. So there are 8 pre-recorded effects pads available, but in fact there are 8 banks of 8 pads available, so you have up to 64 sounds total available, up to 512 megabytes in the unit itself. So it comes with these pre-recorded. Thank you very much. Or you can record them yourself. So you can have your podcast intro and mid-roll and outro music available at the touch of a button, or you can pre-record spots or interviews and have those available as well. One really nice feature about that is it tells you how much time is left. Turn it down just a little bit. It tells you how much time is left on this recording, 56 seconds and counting down. So if you have something running, you can mute your channel and have a side discussion and then come back and know when this is going to end. Very handy. There's a USB input that provides stereo input from a PC or another device. There's a stereo phone or line interface that you access with a TRS-S plug on the back of the unit. So you can connect mobile phones or iPads or iPods or other mixers to this mixer. But you do need an adapter again for iPhones. You need the Lightning to TRRS adapter and a cable to do that. There is a Bluetooth interface though also, so you can connect directly to your mobile phone or an iPad through the Bluetooth interface. And Mix Minus is available on the TRRS, the USB, and the Bluetooth interface. So you can connect remote guests on any of these channels via cell phone or Skype or Slack or whatever service you'd like to use. That's very handy as well. There is an internal recorder. So you can, on the internal micro SD card that's in the back of the unit, you can record up to 256 gigabytes of information. You record the stereo mix from all the inputs, and it can also record each channel individually so that you can fix problems in post-processing later if you need to. The recordings are all named by date and by time. There's also a USB output, so this unit provides 12 individual channel inputs to a PC or a pad, and the mic is sent out in mono channels, and the mix and other stereo inputs are sent out in separate stereo channels. Now the power supply on the back uses a screw-down connector to prevent accidental removal. And if you go to turn off the unit on the power, push the power button, there's a confirmation button or a confirmation display that says, are you sure you want to turn it off? So it's very difficult to defeat this system by accidentally unplugging units or accidentally pushing buttons. So no, I don't want to reset it or turn the unit off. You can also purchase an adapter for accessory USB power, and you can run the unit off of 5-volt power packs. So that's very handy for remote recording. You can also save shows in a similar fashion to the Zoom L-8 scenes saving. So the shows basically a snapshot of everything on your Rodecaster Pro, all the settings, the sounds, and everything. The only thing it doesn't do is it doesn't save the slider positions. But you can save shows off and even copy them to another Procaster if you're used to having your own settings and your own presets and everything. It's very useful if you have a studio with multiple Procasters. There are really good training videos available from Rode on YouTube that you can go look at for the various features. And again, those features may change from time to time based on the firmware that's loaded in your unit. The cons about the Rodecaster Pro is that there's no tunable per channel EQ for the mics, only the presets. There's no threshold settings for noise gate or compressor or de-esser, but it generally does a really good job in most cases. Even on the presets, there's no need to tune the settings. There's no renaming of files on an SD card, so you only get date and time naming. You have to record the date and time that you started your recordings in order to get back to them on the SD card. There's no editing the files on the SD card directly, which is not that big of a deal. There are limited inputs for instruments. You can always connect a separate mixer for instruments if you need to, but it's really designed for microphones and for podcasting, not for mixing down music. And the final con is that if you want to run the unit on 5-volt USB power, like from a USB power brick, then you'll need to order a separate accessory cable from Rode.
So the biggest difference between the Rodecaster Pro and the Zoom L-8 is the signal processing that's built into the Rodecaster Pro. Each channel on the Rodecaster has similar functionality to the Aphex channel strip processor that's used by broadcasting professionals worldwide to sweeten their audio. That processing combines a high-pass filter, which both the Zoom L-8 and the Rodecaster Pro do have, but the Rodecaster Pro also includes a compressor, a de-esser, a noise gate, and an Aphex aural exciter that the Zoom L-8 doesn't include. So you'll either need to add external channel strips for each microphone, or you'll have to do post-processing to get equivalent performance. And while the Rodecaster Pro is more expensive than the Zoom L-8, the Rodecaster has this very valuable signal processing already built in. So, which podcast mixer is better for your particular application? My recommendations are to get the Rodecaster Pro if you're working with non-techies, because it has a relatively unintimidating user interface. It reduces clutter by pointing the cables out of the back of the unit. There are clear training videos available from Rode on YouTube for basic functions, and the overall ergonomics are good. The controls are easy to understand, especially with the color touchscreen. I'd recommend the Rodecaster Pro if you don't want to do a lot of post-processing, because the microphone and signal processing presets give solid results. Again, the Rodecaster includes the equivalent of several $100s worth of external signal processing products that the L-8 doesn't have. And the Rodecaster sound pads can help you create, record it, and ship it results with little or no post-processing needed. All the sound pads on the Rodecaster Pro are always available. They don't depend on channel assignments like the Zoom L8 does. However, there is one caveat. For battery-powered operation, you need to buy a special extra-cost adapter from Rode. Now, I'd recommend that you get the Zoom LiveTrak L8 if your users are more technically savvy and lots of knobs and buttons don't intimidate them. You'll feel right at home with the L8 if you're already familiar with running traditional mixers and you know how to perform more complex operations. The Zoom L8 is definitely a better choice if you want to record instruments as well as voice, because it has 2 more inputs than the Rodecaster Pro, and those 2 inputs can be used to plug guitars or other instruments directly into the mixer. It also includes echo and reverb effects that are great for live and recorded vocal performances, but not included on the Rodecaster. In fact, you can use the L8 as a small house mixer for non-podcast applications if you'd like. However, you may end up doing a fair amount of post-processing, because if you want top-notch recordings on your podcast, you'll have to add per-channel voice sweetening in post, like compression and other signal processing that's built into the Rodecaster Pro. Again, I'm not receiving any endorsements for this video, but I would like to put in a shameless plug for castergear.com and for my podcast, IoT Wavelength. Podcasts are related to the Internet of Things, and so are many other things like telemedicine, autonomous vehicles, artificial intelligence, etc. So if you'd like to learn more about these transformational technologies and applications of the Internet of Things, sign up at iotwavelength.com and subscribe to the IoT Wavelength YouTube channel below. And if you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching, and happy podcasting.